Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. It's Ukraine Frontline update, Ukraine War Frontline update for the 22nd of May 2023. Let's get straight to the front line. We'll go to the northeast sector, which is, as you may already know, Kupiansk to Svatva to Kreminna. That axis there on my map, that looks like this, with Kupiansk up here, Svatva and Kreminna down there. The ISW, Institute for the Study of War, states that there have been repelled offensive operations in Adiivka, Stelmakivka, Makivka, a bunch of the usual places, Bilohorivka. That is to say that Adiivka is up here. That is where the Russians took some territory. It's a couple of houses there, not too much, but there is activity taking place there. And then as we come further down this front line, we come to Stelmakivka and Makivka there. But not too much to report along that axis, no great detail. Now, there has been some increases in Russian territory, some gains in this area. I reported this yesterday in the meandering Oxbow Lakes and river of the Sversky Donetsk. That is, we can see in Poulet-Volon's map here, just at the top there, some Russian gains in that river area. Other than that, not really a lot to report. There's some pushing in Bilohorivka, some fighting taking place there, repelled attacks. And further down here by the other Bilohorivka and Berestova, so activity there too. And then we move on to yellow arrows, which now seem to be much more commonplace in and around Bakhmut. And I guess, we'll go to Bakhmut now. There isn't too much really to report. And yeah, as we come to Bakhmut, reminder of the maps and in fact the mapping. So there's not been a lot of change with a lot of the mappers, both north and south. I've had nothing from Andrew Perpetua, nothing from really deep state map, the pro-Ukrainian mapper. I'm sure there are territorial exchanges going on or movements both north and south. It's just not being reported by the mappers. Suryak Maps, the pro-Russian mapper, is taking a week and a bit off and won't be back until the end of May to update their maps, and they're represented here by the red lines. So that will be unchanged no matter what happens. Yeah, that's the situation. Blue lines are Andrew Perpetua's mapping lines, and I said that represents the Russian lines, not the Ukrainian line. The Russian lines, they're defensive lines coming down, and then into Bakhmut it exchanges to what the Russians controlled yesterday. Actually, I've changed that now. It is just Andrew Perpetua's mapping, the blue line, from pretty much Sakio-Vansetti up here all the way down to Mayorsk down here. So that is Andrew Perpetua's lines. The yellow's deep state and the red Suryak Maps, but not a lot of change, even though there might actually be change. Okay, let's see what the ISW says. It's all about Bakhmut, as you can imagine still. So, Wagner Group mercenaries likely secured the western administrative borders of Bakhmut city, while Ukrainian forces are continuing to prioritize counterattacks on the outskirts. Ukrainian military officials reported that Ukrainian forces control and, quote, insignificant parts of southwestern Bakhmut city around the T0504 highway. This was, I think, what Zelensky was referring to yesterday. So a lot of claims about Ukraine still being in control of some parts of Bakhmut, so it's not that Russia control the whole of it. I think that's going to be at most maybe a few buildings here. As you can see, Suryak Maps has that under control of the Russians. Andrew Perpetua and Deep State, a little bit of difference there in this area. Whether they control a few buildings there or not, in my opinion, is kind of neither here nor there. You can see that as important if you want. I don't know. I think it's more about what takes place with regard to fixing and attrition. Here we have Russians waving flags on the westernmost buildings. They have been geolocated to this spot, so we'll see where those buildings where they're waving flags are, and indeed they are the westernmost buildings there, which are under control of the Russians, as you can see. I guess still the question is, who controls these buildings, and does it particularly matter? As I said, I don't think so too much. So a tacit acknowledgement that Russian forces have secured the rest of the western and northwestern Bakhmut, if not all of it. These official statements indicate that Ukrainian forces withdrew from the remaining areas in Bakhmut, except those adjacent to the two highways into the city. So that is to say that there might be some presence here as the T0504 comes into Bakhmut from the south, and the O0506 comes in to Bakhmut from the north in this Kromova area. There could be some Ukrainian troops still in that district there, although there were claims yesterday, Syrian Map said that the Ukrainians had vacated Kromova. I don't know. I have not seen any verification of that. Kind of either way. ISW says geolocated footage published yesterday showed Wagner forces raising flags, and I've just shown you that. The Wagner group's likely capture of the last remaining small area of western Bakhmut does not impact ongoing Ukrainian counterattacks north or south of Bakhmut. Exactly my point the last few days. Nor does it impact Ukrainian control over the ground lines of communications, the G-locks around Bakhmut that exhausted Wagner forces would need in order to conduct further offensive operations. Russian forces will likely need additional reinforcements to hold Bakhmut and its flanks at the expense of operations in other directions, and that's what we talked about the last few days. The whole point of this is to fix Russian troops, and they've been drawn from other areas, which then weakens those other areas up and down the front line. ISW has observed artillery units of the 132nd Separate Guards Motorized Rifle Brigade, which was previously observed in Adiivka, operating in Bakhmut direction, and there have been lots of claims that Adiivka is one of those places along the front line that has had their troops, Russian troops, removed in order to support the operation in Bakhmut. So Adiivka is there, moving up to Bakhmut, and there are claims that forces from Kreminna have also supported Bakhmut, which has then led to reserves being brought in from Belarus around the corner and into Luhansk to support the Kreminna line, where they have been weakened by the support of Bakhmut. So the theory goes, or so some of the claims go. Right, ISW, Institute for the Study of War, American military think tank, previously forecasted that Wagner offensive operations would likely culminate after months of attritional urban combat, and it is unlikely that Wagner will continue fighting beyond Bakhmut at its current depleted state. So Prigozhin has claimed that he will pull out his troops on the 25th, and they will be replaced by the Russian conventional forces, but that will then weaken the conventional forces who will have to bring troops from elsewhere. It also, it just shows that they have properly culminated. I mean, that's literally what's happened, and Prigozhin has admitted that they need to reconstitute. They're exhausted, so on and so forth. So any people who are doubting that Wagner have been pretty much on the edge of culminating, or really have culminated for the last kind of 2 or 3 weeks, living on Cloud Cookie Land. I mean, they clearly culminated. They were unable to hold the flanks, and they have taken a hold of Bakhmut, but that's then done, right? And with the inability to recruit from prisons, they're doubly done. Russian President Putin congratulated the Wagner Group and Russian military yesterday for capturing Bakhmut, and Prigozhin predictably claimed the victory over Bakhmut city entirely for himself. He's like, yeah, that was us, that was Wagner. It wasn't the Russians, the paratroopers and others who came to help us. Of course it wasn't. I mean, it was mainly Wagner, but more recently, in the last month, they wouldn't have been able to continue without the assistance of the regular Russian forces. And that's what I'm saying. They had culminated. ISW is saying they culminated. Pro-Russian voices were denying this, but it was pretty obvious that was the case. Okay, let's look at a few claims. So, in the Bakhmut direction, the excellent work of the Ukrainian 3rd Separate Assault Brigade made it possible to destroy 9 units of Russian equipment, one tank, 4 IFVs. So we've seen really high IFV losses for the Russians recently, and 4 cars. So I think this is from artillery as opposed to actual forces on the ground. You see lots of pockmarks around here, and then the vehicles have just been abandoned in the middle of the road as they've been rendered inoperable. It's pretty unfortunately, the camera's all over the shop on this particular drone, but you can see there that there have been some losses of Russian vehicles, and that's been counted up. Sorry, I'm just going through this quite quickly, but that's the count up there, and that has been found as another video there. That has been found at this location, so let's geolocate that. These have been lost in this area, but it doesn't mean that the Ukrainian troops are there. And indeed, that's quite far behind the lines, behind Adiivka, and that's the road, or it could be that road actually that you're seeing there. So that is activity taking place there. Ukrainians are somewhere near Klishchivka again. You know, as of yesterday, I'm not really sure what the lines actually are in this area. It's all a bit murky as to what is going on. Then we have so that was the Adiivka claims there, and then we have some further claims here. So this is going up north, and this is actually a video of a Ukrainian APC being taken out, being hit by ATGM, and as I've said before, you see these explosions of ATGMs, and you think, right, that's everyone dead in there, but it's not actually. The troops just get out the back. Whether they'll be, you can see that someone looks like they're probably pretty badly injured, or at least injured there. But these guys then sort of move off as as the vehicle is likely to be to blow up, and then indeed later on it cuts to it exploding there, being on fire. So that has been geolocated to let's just find that. That's down here. Yes, so this is a geolocation for that. So that's a Ukrainian vehicle attacking. So this is an offensive Ukrainian operation, although the vehicle was taken out, and that is again behind their lines. So that means the Ukrainians are operating here, taken out by an ATGM, which would indicate that, yeah, activity is around here. The Russian lines, that's right next to the Russian lines, is according to, well, all three mappers, really. That's not a great distance there. All three mappers say it's going to be there or thereabouts. So, yeah, again, that footage would confirm those lines to some degree. I mean, it's going to be there or thereabouts. As I say, you know, these mappers disagree, but these are matters of fields, and things are really dynamic on the front. Well, in fact, let's go to read by now pro-Russian source. It says in Bakhmut, the Wagner forces have completely liberated the city, which has been stormed for 224 days. The remnants of the Ukrainian forces could not withstand the onslaught and retreated, leaving defensive positions. Yeah, well, I wouldn't paint it as glorious as kind of that. War Mapper states that Russian control of the southwest of the city is now confirmed, and the Ukrainians have advanced further east of Bodonivka, so just south of this reservoir there. There is some gain. I already have that gain here. It depends which map you're talking about. So actually, this would suggest that the deep state map here, there's advances from there, and in fact, the Andrew Perpetua has it further, as you can see here, right at the end of the reservoir. So the mappers say slightly different things, but you get the idea. There's movement there. Just Global War Monitor here saying that Russia's captured the remaining Ukrainian strongholds and that Bakhmut has fallen. Obviously, some people disagree on whether all the buildings are completely taken. And this is, I just want to point out, the destruction. Remember, when we're talking about lines on a map, these are human lives. Just always remember, on both sides, people dying for this senseless war is horrible. Those Russians dying, being sent in, being mobilized, thinking that this might be their only way out of prison, being sent into their deaths, and the Ukrainians defending their homeland, their families, and freedom from a senseless invasion. And this is what liberation looks like. This is Bakhmut. Thanks for that, Putin. Yeah, really. Thanks for that, Putin. I mean, absolutely horrific. Just makes me so angry that a couple of years ago, this was no doubt a bustling, vibrant town. And that's what it's been reduced to, in the name of liberation, in the name of protecting the Donbass. Just absolutely enrages me. It enrages me, this. It's absolute senseless violence. As you can tell, I'm getting angry. It just winds me up. And it winds me up that people can defend that. People on my threads here, these pro-Russian voices, you know who you are. You know what names. Everyone else knows who you are. Is this what you want? Is this your idea of moral rectitude? Can you justify this with good argument? Because you can't. You can't. It just lives are being thrown away because of Putin's imperialistic desires. And if you're being paid in a bot farm to support that, shame on you. Go and get a different job. Shame on you. And if you're not being paid to do that, you're doing it because that you've done the moral justification of that with your own rationale, possibly even more shame on you. Man. Anyway, near Bakhmut, there is still lots of active. Sorry, sometimes I can't hold back. Ukrainian 30th Mechanized Brigade assaulting Russian positions in the area of Bakhmut. I don't know exactly where, but you get the idea that this kind of activity is taking place, all the time around both north and south. Here we have infantry, and then going and clearing out foxholes and dugouts and this kind of stuff, going on all over the shot. This is kind of a montage of them clearing out lots of positions, bit of combined arms, tanks, as well as APCs and IFVs. These are the guys doing the clearing operations, but again, not exactly sure where, or it's a whole number of places. Now, let's go on to Igor Girkin. I've talked over the last 2 or 3 days about, the last few weeks, about what the objective for the Ukrainians is for Bakhmut and why they were defending. Attrition and fixing, right? And even though they don't control any buildings or control 1 or 2 buildings, whatever, in Bakhmut, it's a victory for Ukraine. It's literally a textbook definition of a Pyrrhic victory. Like, Prigozhin has admitted they've exhausted themselves and they need to go and reconstitute. They have, scare quotes, won this town, but actually they've lost because the Ukrainians were defending on the calculation that the Russians were losing a greater ratio of troops than they were. It was fixing the Russian troops in this position so they can't be used elsewhere. They've got an imminent counteroffensive that they hadn't dipped into their own trained and newly provided equipment for this. And the counterattacks they're doing are localized. They're still managing to fix and attrite the Russian soldiers, and they are taking territory and apparently still encircling Bakhmut. There are various claims as to whether it's stalled or whether it's continuing, but the point is that the Russians are being fixed and attrited. And then you have someone who is an ultra-nationalist who wants the Russians to completely succeed, has even fought for the Russians, both as a volunteer, but also was in charge of the Donbass militias in 2014 onwards. This guy is a military guy, Igor Girkin, has done a big analysis of Bakhmut and agreed completely with my position. So pro-Russians, you don't not only need to argue substantively against what I am saying, but also against what one of your own is saying. He talks about it, so in a nutshell, and he says that how, this was on the end of Kharkiv and Kherson counteroffensives going south. And then he said, thus starting an offensive in the Donbass in the late autumn of last year, quote, military strategists, scare quotes, again tried to solve for the political leadership the task that our elderly cretins drew in their heads. Completely liberate the Donbass and start bargaining with Kyiv and dear Western partners in order to impose on them the status quo. Crimea, Donbass, and the corridor to Crimea stay with us. We do not pretend to be more. As we can see, this task has not been solved, even to a small extent, in 7 months of bloody battles, which in many areas near Adiivka and Marinka, for example, are almost continuous. And the fact that Wagner supplied and replenished until the middle of winter this year on Lux standard, at the cost of almost complete loss of their own infantry, managed to get in 2 towns of Vuhledar and Bakhmut during the months-long meat grinder, is the only tactical victory. And in connection with the complete failure of the strategic task, the capture of Bakhmut is presented as, quote, scare quotes, the crown of military leadership and, scare quotes, an epoch-making battle of world historical significance. But he goes on. Meanwhile, as already noted above, on the whole, the operation ended in a strategic failure of our troops. So this is the success of Ukraine in losing Bakhmut. It's a Pyrrhic victory, and this is exactly what he's saying. The enemy has not been ousted from the Donbass in all the main directions. In most directions, has not been moved at all. During the offensive, the Russian armed forces used up a lot of trained manpower, exhausted almost to the bottom the stocks of weapons, equipment, and ammunition necessary for further offensive operations. Definition of Pyrrhic victory. Therefore, increased attention has been paid to Bakhmut's capture, scare capture, for the past 2 months. It was necessary to achieve at least some result, quote, for propaganda, in order to, quote, take a breath later. Look, we, quote, won. And yesterday, they stopped immediately at the outskirts of Bakhmut. As soon as they crawled to it, there is no strength to go further. Look up the definition of a Pyrrhic victory. I did a video talking about the history of the Pyrrhic victory, going back to Greek times, is taking a town, but exhausting yourself so much that you can then just be hit back, or you have no ability to go on, and you end up that ends up costing you in the long run. So the last part of this. Now we should be waiting for the return move of the enemy, similar to the one that was made by the enemy in September, right after our valiant generals, quote, scare quote, finished the tiny town of Pesky on the outskirts of Donetsk. That's Pisky, throughout a month. Why do I think the enemy will attack soon? Precisely because now he has the best chance of success. The best strike units of the Russian armed forces are exhausted by many months of battles. The stock of ammunition is minimal. If, for example, the enemy chooses the Donetsk front for attack, for example, the Mariupol direction, then he will be met by units and subunits badly battered and thinned by the transfer of reserves to Bakhmut. And if he decides to attack on the Zaporizhia front, then he may not worry about the stability of his defense in the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk direction and near Avdiivka. And then he goes on to conclude, therefore, I consider the victory near Bakhmut, A, initially unnecessary, it's a distraction to an unusable object, and B, Pyrrhic. It was not worth the effort and money spent on it, even approximately. I mean, this is super damning. It's just not worth it for the Russians. Anyway, I don't have any other, greater detail other than it appears there are some claims of some Ukrainian sources that they are making inroads into genuinely encircling the Russians in Bakhmut. So there could be more territory gained that is not represented by my map here. But I guess we shall see in the next few days. Right. Coming on down, and again, it's what the Russians are going to do now. Will they just stop? Is that just signs that they are completely exhausted? Will they continue to Ivanivska? What will they do in terms of drafting in reserves? Will they still see the encirclement as a massive threat and pull in those troops from elsewhere? Right, Avdiivka, there is talk about there being sort of gains up here like that I talked about the other day. If we go to ISW, in Avdiivka, we have, where am I going to? Pervomaisky, there it is. So, Russian forces continued offensive operations on the Donetsk city Avdiivka front line, but have not made any verifiable gains. It's fighting around Adiivka, Marinka to the south, Pervomaisky, Novokalinove, that's to the north of Avdiivka, Pervomaisky is to the south, as is Siverny. A Kremlin-affiliated mill blogger claimed that Russian forces intensified offensive operations in the Donetsk city front line and attacked. True. In the western part and northern parts of Marinka, in the direction of Pervomaisky, on the southwestern and eastern approaches to Avdiivka, and in Novokalinove, so attacking all over the shop. Geolocated footage published 2 days ago showed Ukrainian forces striking Russian positions near the highway northeast of Krasnohorivka. So this represents the gains here. So the highway northeast, and in fact, movement up to the railway line there that I showed you yesterday, I think the day before. Now, Avdiivka has been the scene of some significant Russian losses. They have lost an awful lot of equipment, as according to geolocated video footage and other mappers. Andrew Perpetua says the past few days Russia has tried attacking the area south of Pervomaisky. They've taken significant casualties, and they are shelling those 3 red X's I marked. So there's shelling taking place there. So this is Pervomaisky. In this area to the south of Pervomaisky there, north of Nevelska. Let's go back to that. So he says, here's a video, and I showed you a video of javelins being used in this area. I'm pretty sure that was from this area. Really close javelin attacks on equipment. You can see there's quite a lot of equipment being used here by the Russians. This is a renewed attack, a bunch of attacks, but they've done this time and time again. Is send a bunch of equipment in without really without realizing that every time they've done that before, they've had all their equipment blown up. They just do it again, battering their heads against a brick wall, and then the equipment gets blown up again. And there you go. So Pervomaisky, they've lost a whole bunch of other stuff. Yeah, the video is obviously multiple videos combined together, most of which you can watch separately. For example, this one, and he just shows that a longer part of one of those spliced videos, just showing the same sort of stuff, which is Russian equipment getting taken out. This is actually behind Russian lines in that case. That video is being geolocated, just to give you an idea on my map. That's back here. So they are trying to do this encirclement of Pervomaisky, possibly, rather than possibly trying to encircle Novelsky as well. This is holding out. It's on a slight hill as well, so and there's lots of entrenchments around here. But yeah, it's just been a bit of a graveyard for Russian equipment in the area. Are these actually VDV units attacking, or just VDV type vehicles? Well, I don't know. It could be the paratroopers, in which case that's more elite units being ground down in the Adiivka area, and that's that video that Andrew Perpetua is talking about taking place there. They just it's been bad news for the Russians around there, here we have some geolocation of this. So the aerial reconnaissance of 36th Marine Brigade is processing Russian burrows. So they are taking out Russians in this area. So aerial reconnaissance the 36th Marine Brigade bombs Russian soldiers along the railroad in western Novobakhmutivka. That's going back up to the north of Avdiivka here. That's being geolocated to this position. I love it when it does that. So these are the railway lines, and you can see that the positions, the dugouts that they have and foxholes are being hit hard by the Ukrainians. Will we see them advance? I don't know. Is this just the daily kind of attritional warfare that we're used to seeing? But that's activity taking place further to the north, and then we're going to come down. So no exchange of territory there, but the Russians are losing quite a bit of equipment, it appears, in the area, and quite a bit of activity in Marinka, by all accounts. Still, fierce fighting there. The ISW did make a couple of mentions of Marinka, and then we come on down to Novomyrkhailivka, where there seems to be quite a bit of activity, which is here. And that could represent the fighting that's going on in Solodka here. So I talked about how the Ukrainians made some advances here. And in fact, if you look at Andrew Perpetua's mapping, he has some gains for the Ukrainians there and push back on this line that Solodka is on, which would have here. That means for Andrew Perpetua, the Russians have been pushed back to here, and that line goes quite far down. And all of the, in fact, he pretty much has Volodymyrivka in the grey zone. So if you look down here, the north of that, this is all the grey zone as far as Andrew Perpetua is concerned, pro-Ukrainian mapper. So all of this he has in the grey zone there. So it could be that the Ukrainians have made some gains in that area. I did mean to go on to look at Vuhledar's further maps. I might have to just do that as an afterthought. This is what Rebar says about Avdiivka. Near Avdiivka, Russian troops continue to expand the control zone north of Krasnohorivka. That's by that railway line I was showing you. To the west of the village, positional battles continue along the railway. And then that's pretty much it. That's the end of. It talks about storm shadows being used against Berdyansk. If we go back to Vuhledar's map. Sorry, I forgot to say, there it is. That's what's happened in the middle of Bakhmut, and this is what's happening around Avdiivka. And that's what Rebar is talking about. This I'd already had, apart from that tiny bit there, which I updated yesterday or 2 days ago. This had been updated, at least a week ago. So this is, I think, Vuhledar just catching up there, rather than that indicating that yesterday the Russians gained. They didn't gain all that territory. I mean, I've had that, as I said, for a good couple of weeks. So that's the last of the mapping from Vuhledar, and really not a lot else along the whole of the front line. Just kind of positional, artillery duels being, exchanged between the two sides. and then goes on to talk about HIMARS hits and Storm Shadow hits. As you can see there, Berdyansk Storm Shadow hits and geolocation of that, of the mess hall being hit there. The Russians claim that they cleared out the mess hall by then, and obviously no one died type thing, and the Ukrainians claiming that loads of people died, and who knows what the exact truth is. And then, just not really an awful lot else to report. Russian sources claim that Russian fires destroyed a Ukrainian observation post in an unspecified area on the west bank of the Dnipro, used to adjust fires against the east bank, so on and so forth. All that usual kind of fairly positional stuff now. I say now, that's in light of the fact that there has been quite a lot of activity along this river. And of course, as I said in my news piece, a Su-35 was taken out near Zalizhny port, 50 kilometers from the front line, which is significant because if that's 50 kilometers from the front line, then actually that air defense is not going to be sat there. The air defense is more likely going to be, I don't know, somewhere in Mykolaiv maybe. You can imagine that there could be some significant capacity of, or significant capability of air defense here. I don't know whether that be in Nazams, Iris-T, whether you could even imagine, because there were so many Russian planes dropping these guided FAB-500 bombs in the area, whether a Patriot system could have been placed nearby. I've been saying previously that I would place a Patriot system if I could, but get away with it. Patriot system around Zaporizhia to protect the city that gets hit by S-300 so often. Patriot can take them out and also stop air activity around here, but also, maybe even more importantly, to put a Patriot system. Well, the reason why it would be good to put it around Zaporizhia, because then it could support an offensive taking place for the Ukrainians. So it would support their air force as they did close air support and softening up of targets around the Zaporizhia area. But you could also, think up some pretty good justification for putting a Patriot around Mykolaiv to then protect around here, not only for any kind of offensive operation that might take place across the river, but to protect from the VKS using their guided bombs, which they are doing to great effect along the river. So, yeah, I don't know. Let me know what you think. Anyway, that's today's update. Really appreciate that you're watching my videos here. Thank you so much. Thanks to all my members. You're legends. I'm just about to do an interview, a quick cup of tea. In 20 minutes, I'll be doing an interview with Valeria Quinn, who is the wife of actually someone who watches my channel, put me onto her. And she's, I think, CEO of a charity working out of Poltava at the moment. And I'm going to interview her just now. So my extra is almost certainly going to be that interview rather than any other content. I might do a shorter one later. It just depends on time. But yeah, please keep your eyes peeled for that. It won't be a live. I was going to do it live, but I just want to make sure the connection's good and everything. So I'm going to do it as a pre-record and then release that. Anyway, thanks so much. You take care, and I'll speak to you soon.